Recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
It's the economy, stupid, and I'm Dan Perkins.
And jobs as well, and I'm Don Mazzella.
If it's important to you, it's important to us, the two guys from Verona.
Time for Two Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host, talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings.
Well, Don, as I said in my opening comment, it's about jobs. Last Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that America created 38,000 new jobs. And the government and the private sector was looking for somewhere in the neighborhood of 162,000. In fact, the ADP number in the middle of the week came in at about 150. So last month they hit it right on the button with the Friday report, but they missed big time. In addition, they revised the previous 2 months' numbers downward 59,000 people. And there were two other pieces of information that came out on Friday, and that is that the participation rate, which means the percentage of available workers working, fell to a low since 1977 to a little about 62.5%. In addition, we had 38,000 jobs they said were created, but over 640,000 people left the employment and became the largest number of unemployed and underemployed people at 94.7 million people in the United States. 94.7 million, which is the high. A couple of other numbers why I think it's about jobs. The gross domestic product in the second reading was revised slightly upward to 0.8% for the first quarter. Now, 0.8% is about an eighth of 1% growth per month. Also reported this week, yesterday, was that the productivity of American workers actually declined 1%. And for the last 5 years, the average productivity gain for the American worker was less than 2% per annum. All of these are numbers that indicate that the economy is going nowhere. Now, prior to the jobs number on Friday, the market had been listening to Janet Yellen in the Federal Reserve, where they were talking about raising interest rates probably at least 2 times between now and the end of the year. The 38,000 number was such a bad number that today Yellen in a speech indicated that perhaps there may not be a rate hike until September, and that will depend upon the June number and the July number. And she said it's possible that there will be no raising of interest rates in the U.S. the balance of this year. Now, the Fed's already told us that they don't want to raise rates after September because they don't want to be accused of manipulating interest rates in the economy in anticipation of the election. It appears to me, Don, and you can certainly chime in here, it appears that for the moment at least, both Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton don't seem to want to talk about what's going on in the jobs market. They would much rather talk about personal things about each other.
Well, you've hit it on the nose. The number one issue in the presidential campaign will be the economy. The economy, the economy. Yet we're not talking about it. I'll blame the media as well as the candidates, because we're not asking the hard questions that should be done. The participation rate, that's a relatively new number. So it's one we should be scared of. Every number that you just cited should frighten the bejabbers out of anybody that depends on the economy for a living. Worse yet, I heard an interesting item in the New York Post today. Everybody talks about how Donald Trump hates women, but no one asked the question, does Hillary Clinton hate men? If you listen to her rhetoric. And the real problem is that, in my view, is that women really don't have a chance right now to have an effect on the economy. I just saw a study came across my desk that less than 20% of all the businesses bought in the United States were bought by women. Now, they make up 47% of the small businesses in this country, their leadership, but most women start their business, they do not buy a business. And right now, there are far more businesses available for sale than there are people wanting to buy them, all of which tells me that we're in trouble. I'll go back to you now, Dan.
Well, you raise an interesting point. It's one number I forgot to mention out of the jobs numbers. Of the 94.7 million people out of work, 54 million of them, Don, are women. 54 million. So more than half. They may be 45% of the population or 47% of the population, but they're more than 50% of the people that are unemployed or underemployed in the country today. It's interesting you raised the question about women, and we have the discussion about Donald Trump's war on women, and we have the issue of whether Hillary's really concerned about women, whether she hates men, which is a point that you're making. But, I thought about something today when I read on Drudge that I won't call her lying Hillary or cheating Hillary. I call her sneaky Hillary. Sneaky Hillary convinced the Associated Press last night to declare her the candidate, that she already has enough votes in order to become the candidate of the Democratic Party, and the contention was that she did it before the California primaries voting's open because she wanted to try and influence the vote in California to convince people that it was over and not to vote for Bernie, either to stay home or vote for herself. Another dirty trick against Bernie and the people that are following him. But I thought it was interesting how they were, again, manipulating the media to their advantage. But go ahead if you want to say.
Funny you mentioned that, because the New York Times earlier today in the front page trumpeted that she had won. But just before we went on the air tonight, they had pulled down the story, which I found very interesting. It is no longer the lead story on the New York Times online. And yet this morning they were saying she had won, quoting the Associated Press. And I think that's a significant straw in the wind. We're going to be off the air before California closes.
Right.
We'll know the results tomorrow. But in my view, if she doesn't win by 8 or 9 points, it's a loss for her, regardless of what happens.
Well, I know you said that in the past. I wonder if there's a little more leeway that she could, it could be less than 8 or 9, whether, is 6 or 7 still a pretty good number, or if it's barely squeaks through like she did in West Virginia, does that create a problem? You're smarter than I am. I don't understand that at all. But well, there's some music. We got to take a break. This is Dan Perkins
and Don Mazzella.
Two guys from Verona. And go to our website, twoguysfromverona.com, and we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Dan, you wanted to finish your thought?
Yeah, I do. I thank you, sir. I was just thinking as I was riding in the car this morning, and I recalled the announcement last night that was on the news that the Associated Press had declared Hillary the candidate, and the language that they used was it was a historical moment because for the first time in the history of our country we have a woman candidate for president of the United States, and I know that it's impossible to put myself in a woman's shoes, but I wonder, with her reputation and the shenanigans that she's doing and the way she's lying consistently to the people about what happened with her email server and everything else, I wonder if women will vote for her knowing that she may not be the most legitimate female candidate that they could have. Will they vote for her as people voted for Obama, saying it was time to have the first black president? Will people vote for her because it's time to have the first female president? Or will they turn her away, not because she's a woman, but will women turn away from her because they don't trust her and they don't have the confidence in her that she'll make the right decisions for the country?
Well, I'd like to address that issue. Both parties are running focus groups of various types trying to answer exactly that question. My personal opinion is if Donald Trump nominated a woman as vice president, he'd be a shoo-in. Maybe even that 49-1 that you think is a possibility. But it's interesting. The focus groups find that women are very much torn. If they feel if they're more independent-minded and not democratically focused, they really do stop and say, "I don't know if I can pull that lever." Well, if Donald Trump between now and the election day manages to dampen his anti-women rhetoric, which I don't think is that bad, but which the media seems to think is bad, I think he stands a very good chance of picking up those women. The interesting thing is that in the focus groups, the independent women don't view his negative comments as badly as they view the way Hillary Clinton lies and cheats. You're right. But this is not an election that's based on normal perceptions or anything else. It's really been an election that very few of us thought it would end up to be, and it appears to be. What I found interesting, last night I had dinner with a man who's a very man who believes in integrity, etc., and he has a difficulty dealing with Donald Trump. But what surprised him was talking to people around the country where the Trump negativism, as you call it, is actually a positive to a lot of people. And I really feel that if Trump can get over some of these gaffes that he's done, he has a very good chance of winning. I give you just one example. Would the media, CNN, spent an hour last night with one thing underneath their picture, my African American. a terrible. He was referring to a congressman in his audience who's running for Congress in a 90% white um, area, and he called him African American. But as you said, would we feel that way? How did you put it? Would African and Irish?
Yeah, the way I put it, Don, is that Irish Americans are as much Irish as African Americans are African, um, and it's part of the problem. But that's another discussion. You know what you just talked about. I did a piece that appeared on the Surge, I think, yesterday, thesurge.com, and it was this comparison that I had mentioned to you of the negatives of Trump and the negatives of Hillary. And I believe the differences between the negatives are substantial. The negatives of Hillary are flaws in her character and her integrity. Much harder to change. If she cheats, if she lies, if she steals, if she manipulates, those are things that are very hard to reverse in a relatively short time of a political campaign. On the other hand, the negatives about Donald are negatives of personality and style, and his flamboyant, shoot from the hip style. Those are much more easily changed than flaws in your character. And I think you wanted to say something about Trump too here.
Well, yes, but before we go, the problem is that Hillary's negatives are not harped on every time they come up by the media. Donald Trump's are harped on. I counted no less than 7 stories on the New York Times front page, online front page, about Trump's negativism right now. If you go to the front page, that said, there's not one story about Hillary and her problems with the emails, with Benghazi, or anything else. And by the way, the trend on Facebook that everybody's complaining about, again, this week it was exactly the same. More negatives about Trump than anything else. Frankly, the more now to get to Trump, as you know, I predicted, and I'm not saying yet that I was wrong. I predicted that neither Trump nor Hillary would be the nominee. I'm thinking I'm going to be forced to eat my words when it comes to Donald Trump. I think the jury's still out when it comes to Hillary. I heard today from somebody since the time we talked that said in Washington the odds of a Biden Warren ticket went up from 5 to or went down from 5 to 1 to 3 to 1, yeah, which I found interesting.
Well, you heard the story, or maybe you didn't hear the story. Drudge reported this afternoon that the FBI, who have been working with a federal judge under secret rules or whatever the thing is, went to the judge over the weekend to present a secret report to the judge, so that the indication from Drudge is that they must be closer because and that they're working with a federal judge, that the FBI is working directly with a judge. Now, the Drudge report didn't say whether or not attorneys from the Justice Department were working with the FBI in presenting this information, whatever it was, for this second round of issues to the judge, but that it did take place. And I find it absolutely amazing, Don, that if there's now been 2 approaches to a federal judge, how that has remained secret all this time. That is the greatest mystery to me, is how nothing has been leaked out of the FBI on this whole long investigation.
Well, I'll tell you why. everybody that's working on that case has been told no uncertain terms, no leaks, no leaks, no leaks. It's your job if we find it out. But don't forget also, we would not know about the emails if it weren't for a federal judge who permitted private organizations to go after them and find them.
Yeah.
We would not have known about it.
Right.
And by the way, did you also see that the IRS finally released a list of nonprofits that they were holding back? And lo and behold, some liberal organizations were on it, but they were placed on it later than the conservative units.
Yeah.
You know, what I always say, figures never lie, but liars always figure.
Right.
And I really believe in that. And I happen to be a supporter of the IRS. I have to tell you that every dealing I've had with the IRS has been extremely positive. I know that's hard to believe in this day and age.
Yeah, and I'm a financial supporter of the IRS. I pay my taxes. We've got to take a break. This is Dan Perkins
and Don Mazzella.
Two guys from Verona. We'll be back shortly.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Well, Don, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Mr. Trump and the second-generation Hispanic judge on the Trump University case. Now, I have to say that there's probably been in your old media some really, really blatant, non-reported issues. I have yet to see anybody on the mainstream media report. I could have missed it because I don't watch television all day 24/7. But I haven't seen anybody talk about the fact that former President Bill Clinton got $16.4 million as a vice chancellor of a for-profit university. $16.4 million. And there are more complaints from students around the world who feel they got shafted than there are people who are disappointed at the outcome at the Trump University. In addition, as I understand, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm only a practicing attorney, not a real attorney. As I understand it, and I listened to Trump last night, the witness for the prosecution, when testified, actually became a supporter of the university and Trump, and she was dismissed. So there is nobody other than the law firm that was representing her left. And Trump's point last night was that there should have been a summary judgment for dismissal because there was no longer a plaintiff. Now, the word is that the firm where the judge came from had contributed about $650,000 in speeches and contributions to Bill and Hillary in the Clinton Foundation. And they were representing on a pro bono basis illegal aliens who had come into the United States over the border. So we've got Bill not being reported about his $16.4 million. And, you know, $16.4 million for a guy who was a temporary chancellor or a part-time chancellor for a for-profit university seems to me like, wow, that's a lot of money. But it fits in the mold of the Clintons, you know, get paid a lot for doing very little. So he felt that the judge was not giving him a fair shake. And he questioned whether or not the reason why he was not getting a fair shake was because he was Hispanic and because of Mr. Trump's outspokenness about doing something with the wall, building a wall, and also about immigration. I know that Newt turned on him a little bit. The Speaker of the House today was very disappointed with Mr. Trump and his language. Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, was also disappointed yesterday. But you know, if if you look at the judicial system, you create a situation where there have been a significant amount of liberal judges who have been interpreting the law as opposed to following the law, whether it's civil, criminal, or constitutional law. And Trump has a point that the judicial system has forgotten how to interpret the law instead of making new laws. And I think that's what's going on, is he's concerned that the judge in this case is interpreting the law and making new law, as opposed to if the defendant or the prosecution loses its only witness because they dismiss it, there is no case, so why do you continue to prosecute? And so I think that there's some truth there. Now, it's interesting from a perspective, and as we talked about in the break, I've got this report on the quote question, is the justice system, everything from the patrolman on the street to the judge in the chambers, are they racist? And we're going to put that report on our website, twoguysfromverona.com, in the next day or so. So if we have anybody listening and they want to read it, because it's very, very enlightening. I think about the president on his Asian tour when he was standing there talking about, in essence, the unjust nature of the criminal system in the United States, because we have a disproportionate share of black people in prison in the United States. So I read this report and read it in length, and basically what they're doing, they start off with the accusation by Maxine Waters, Congresswoman from California. Maxine was saying to the people that the criminal justice system is biased, racist against black people. And this was a study that was done over a 10 to 15 year period in all levels of the justice system, from the guy on the beat cop to the prosecutor to the judges and appellate justice. And what this report shows is that the black community represents approximately 13% of the population of the country, but is accountable for 39% of the total serious crime in the United States. And we look at what's going on, in example, in Chicago, where over Memorial Day weekend there were 60 people shot. And there are the shooting rate in the city of Chicago is up 80% so far this year over last year. The black cop is no more likely, according to this report, to arrest and prosecute a black man, and a white cop is no more likely to arrest or prosecute or push a black man because he's black. So that this report says that there's very little evidence. Not saying there isn't any, but there isn't any substantial evidence that supports the contention from the Maxine Waters of the world and Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton that the police are out to get black people and to kill black youths. And I thought it was a fascinating report on a question that is very topical. Is there race? Is there bias? Is there prejudice in the criminal justice system? And really what they were talking about is that it doesn't appear to be any significant evidence at any level of the judicial and the criminal justice system in the United States. But because of the incidence of crime by the black community on blacks and whites, they have a disproportionate share. And if we don't do anything about that to stop the killing in Chicago and putting people to work, which goes back to the theme of this show, it's about jobs. If we don't put people to work, they're going to turn to other things. Don?
Well, there you go again, confusing politicians with facts. How dare you, Dan?
Yeah.
Politicians have never dealt with facts. and it's very interesting. The New York Times ran a story this week about all the shootings in Chicago, and as you point out, most of these cities are run by black uh, Democrats, and nothing has changed. But you know, my mother and your mother used to have an old expression: "Idle hands breed mischief." And as long as we have young people who don't have jobs, who are facing poverty, uh, we're going to continue to see this happening. You know, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was harkening back to the days when we used to have night court in a lot of cities in the United States. And I remember as a young reporter covering night court, which is always the human interest. They even had a comedy show about it, if you remember,
Oh
many
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
But
I was in love with the prosecutor. She was gorgeous.
yes. Um, and by the way, the creators of that show were very liberal. But the interesting thing is, night court is not a very nice place to be, because you see the very dredges of life. You very seldom see fun. And let's be frank about it: the justice system is not a fun place to be caught up in.
Right.
And Donald Trump, by the way, violated the cardinal rule. You never antagonize the judge. My own feeling: if you got a case against you, you say yes sir, no sir, and walk out of the court and wait till after the trial. Now, that's what I fault him for, because I thought the case was still going on, and instead of keeping quiet, he attacked the judge. Of course, he might have been thinking that they were going to lose and go to the Superior Court, though it seems, if you read the accounts in the paper, they're going to win that case. At some point, it's going to be dismissed, as you point out.
Yeah.
Everything you said, Dan, and that report, which I'm going to look forward to reading, tells you a lot. But I'll go back to President Obama. When he first ran for office, he said he was going to bring us together and we were going to lower the racism issues in America.
Right.
We're now 8 years later, and we're still talking about these very same issues. And in fact, I hate to say it, but as I was reminded by my wife the other day, I was writing about racism on the Newark News in 1965. And we're still talking about it. It's a sad part.
Yeah, but the reality is we're talking about it because the Democrats have made it an issue. And the Democrats always make it an issue. It's always racism. It's always sexism. It's always bigotry against the Republican Party. Because and as a result, the Republicans have always caved in the past. And now we've got Trump, who will not cave, is not caving. It's making it more difficult for the Democratic Party to continue to drag out the old issues, and they're not able to do that and do it effectively to change the campaign. And I think that I'm seeing more and more black people who are protesting, not because they're Trump fans. They're protesting the Democratic Party because they haven't delivered, and they want the vote, and they think they've got them in their hip pocket. And you know, the idea that all of these people are dying and the people are not getting jobs and not creating opportunities, maybe those chickens are coming home to roast this year, at least in a number that may change what's going on. As I've said to you in the past, I think that if Hillary Clinton is the nominee, and if Trump can stay on the campaign concept of jobs and the economy and growth, not only is she not going to win, he could destroy the Democratic Party. And I think that's something. And we got to watch our time here. So we got to go. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
The two guys from Verona. Go to our website, twoguysfromverona.com, and we'll be right back after these messages.
In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
Well, Don, you wanted to finish your point from the last segment, so go ahead.
Well, you started off by saying it's a jobs economy, and I think it's about time that Donald Trump got a prepared script and started to say what he would do to jumpstart our economy. That's going to be the question that's going to decide this election, in my opinion, because the candidate that touches the American core, there isn't a single American family that doesn't know somebody who's out of work or who has stopped looking for work. We now have an underground economy growing. Someone said that Italy, as you know, has a two-pronged underground economy that's very sophisticated. That people are starting to believe that that's the case here in the United States as well. If Donald Trump does not start talking about the economy, all the other things that he's done may come home to roost. But if he comes out with an economic plan or something that makes sense, and by the way, whatever he says, the media will say something different and how terrible it is. But whatever it is, and he talks to the American people, that's what will decide the election.
Well, let me ask you a question. So far, Mrs. Clinton has indicated that she wants to continue the policies of her predecessor, Barack Obama, although she's saying it would be the third Clinton term as opposed to the third Obama term. But my question is, given the state that we've talked about and all the numbers and the anecdotal information and the real life experience, that this economy is in the tank, why does Hillary even want to talk about it?
Well, she doesn't. If she says she doesn't really talk about it. She talks about every other issue. And I'll go back to what Ronald Reagan said. Are you better off today than you were 8 years ago? If you ask every American that, there's very few that say that. They're better off today than they were 8 years ago.
That's I would love to see if Mr. Trump could bring that question back up again. But I go back to the situation. I think O'Reilly, I watched him last night. I think he nailed it pretty good. He said to Trump, he was interviewing Trump, and he said to Trump, look, you know what they're going to do. They're going to come after you on all of the personal issues and your attitude and your big mouth and everything else. And that's what they're going to focus on. And that's not only what Hillary's going to focus on, but that's what all of her surrogates are going to come out in the news media. They're not going to talk about jobs. They're not going to talk about the economy. They're not going to talk about all the stuff that we just talked about. So my guess is that we're looking at a campaign that's going to be waged the typical racist, bigoted, homophobe type of anti-women that they've used for several elections. They're going to try and pull out that horse again, and Trump could easily fall into the fray of reacting to Hillary's. That's a good one. Hillary's attack on him as a person, and distract him away from talking about the issues of jobs and employment.
And what did he say?
He thinks he said that's possible. But I think that's really, she's coming after him. I heard one person on the radio today say, Hillary is in the mood right now to try and define Donald Trump before Donald Trump can define himself. And if she
that's very accurate. But the only way she can do that is if Donald Trump allows her to grab the initiative. And it looks to me, based on what he's done so far, that Trump has managed to pull the initiative away from her. While she's concentrating on Bernie Sanders, Trump has been doing a job of solidifying his support all around the country. And that, to me, is the other issue. Because don't forget, elections are won locally. And whatever else, the Republican Party has a formidable get out the vote campaign, and just my work. I just give you one example. My town, which is heavily, heavily Democratic, Trump, according to the poll watchers, was holding his own in my town, admittedly a small town in New Jersey. And Hillary is not going to take New Jersey with more than 4 percentage points, which is hardly a victory for her.
But if she takes California by 4 points, you think that's not a victory for her in California?
4 points is just about the lowest she can go, and if anything below 4 points is a defeat, and she knows it.
So
she knows.
We got the California and New Jersey primaries. Excuse me, New Jersey primaries today, and we're going to have the California doesn't close till what, 11 o'clock our time or 12 o'clock our time?
Yeah, we're not going to know. At 11:01, they'll tell you.
Okay, just before we should go to bed.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Two Guys from Verona. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
And remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us. And next week we're going to have a guest, which I think you're really going to enjoy. Good night.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona.